They stamped her to own her. She rode in anyway, lantern light flaring the brand like fresh iron. That night by my windmill, west wind, jumping shadows, torches in our teeth, I learned a scar can turn into a badge, and why a rancher might kneel, then stand to guard the only water left. Lantern light slid across her throat, and the room caught the stink of hot iron, like somebody had just pulled a red bar from flesh. The copper mule quit breathing all at once. Piano man's fingers hovered over the ivories and never came down. Dice froze in a gambler's palm. Even the fly, that had been worrying a puddle of beer near my boot, decided it had business elsewhere. She was thin from the road, coat the color of dust, boots cut down at the heels. The coat hung open just enough for the light to find that mark tucked high along the collarbone. Love this tale? Hit like, share, and subscribe to keep the West wild. Raised and raw-looking, though it had long since healed. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't meant to be. The room leaned toward it the way a herd leans toward a waterhole, wary and thirsty both. Brenny coals, soaked in cheap rye and cheaper courage, spat tobacco juice that crawled across the warped boards. "What's that, girl?" he said, grinning to show a mouth like a busted picket fence. Blacksmith miss his swing? She turned her head, slow as a gate in wind, eyes steady the way fence posts hold, even when the wire sings. Her voice came low and even, the kind that makes a man hear his own heartbeat. "It's not a scar," she said. "It's a brand." The words went through the room like a dry lightning strike. No rain, all burn. Laughter died and didn't come back. Somebody's chair squealed and then shamed itself quiet. I felt my hand tighten around the neck of the bottle until glass talked under my grip. My mouth went dry as an arroyo in August. I'd seen marks like it before. Not many. The Red Sash brand isn't for cattle. It's for breaking things that breathe. They heat iron in a ring of mesquite and laughter, hold a body down with boot heels and a rope, and lay their mark where a collar can't hide it unless you choke. I learned the shape back when my hair had more black in it and my nights held more shouting. You don't forget shapes like that any more than you forget the noise a bullet makes when it chooses someone else. She didn't flinch under the looks. She walked to the bar, put down a coin scrubbed clean by miles of road, and asked for coffee. Not whiskey, coffee. May Archer, widowed, eagle-eyed, apron neat no matter how the day treats her, poured from a dented pot, never asking questions with her mouth. Her eyes did enough. Brenny shifted like he might spit again. I could feel the room waiting for me to keep staring into my bottle, same as always. I have a reputation for minding my own. Jake Hollis, windmill fixer, the fellow out past the San Miguel with more fence than friends. Some call me veteran like it's a disease that leaves a man distant from loud rooms. Some call me ghost because I come to town early, buy bolts and cartridges, leave before the sun squares the windows, and don't get in the way of talk. But that brand lit a coal I'd buried deep under ashes of years and rye. Funny how a thing you didn't suffer can still burn you. She turned enough to take the room in, measuring it the way a hand measures rope, thumb to forefinger. No plea in her, no shame either, just the set of a person who's been run through a storm and decided to keep walking. I studied the edge of the iron's work, too crisp to be a rancher's mark, too mean to be anything but chosen. Red Sash. I tasted the name the way a man tastes iron when he bites his tongue. Best let it be, I told myself, same as I told myself 100 times before when trouble looked my way. War taught me the cost of standing tall in the wrong wind. Folks live longer who learn to bend. She sipped, heat fogging the cup's rim. The brand lifted in the lantern's sway, caught yellow, went dark, caught yellow again like a signal you can't quite read. No one else dared translate it. The room had gone to splinters and breath. On my table sat a sack of windmill washers and a coil of rawhide lacing meant for a busted saddle-up country. Work I understand, gears you can grease, bolts you can tighten, heads you can lower against weather, but a mark like that isn't a gear. It's a story hammered hot and left to cool on a throat. It says somebody thought they owned you, and you live to tell them different. She finished the coffee, set the cup down neat. Her eyes came to me for the first time, not begging and not warning, just weighing. I didn't nod, didn't look away. The bottle made a small cluck when I set it down, and that was the loudest sound in the Copper Mule for a long breath. "It's not a scar," she'd said. I knew then the wind over my place would change. The sun hammered the flats till the mesquite threw needles of light and the air smelled like hot pennies. I was riding the fence line where the San Miguel kinks on itself, checking a stretch where wind had worried the wire loose, when I saw her again. One figure on foot, one horse hollowed to the ribs, both headed nowhere quick. The saddle on that roan had torn along the near skirt. Each step ground the rip wider. You could hear Rawhide crying. She kept walking anyway, hand on the cheek piece, eyes on a distance the rest of us couldn't see. I could have ridden past easy. A man learns to let other folks' storms blow by. The habit rose up like a coyote. Look away, touch spur, go. I reined in instead. Dust settled around my boots like the end of an argument. "Hold there," I said low. "You'll split it clean through." She didn't ask me what business I had. She didn't ask anything. The roan rolled an eye, grateful for stopping. I swung down, slid my canteen strap off, and dug in my saddlebag for a coil of rawhide lace. I keep for windmill work and busted tack. Same kind the store sells by the pound, and riders swear is worth twice the price on a bad day. Let me see. I eased the saddle forward, felt the tear, the dry fibers. Square hole wants a square patch. I cut a tongue off a spare fender, punched it through with the awl on my pocket knife, then fed the rawhide like I was stitching a windmill vane to the hub. Slow, straight, no pride about it. The sun beat at the back of my neck. Sweat made a salt river down my spine. She stood quiet, hands light on the reins. Up close I saw the road dust freckled across her coat, the lift and fall of breath that didn't ask pity. Around her throat, tucked lazy under the collar, lay a short strip of old rawhide, dark from sweat and years. A keepsake, the way some men carry a coin they can't spend. The brand showed at the edge of it, when the wind flicked, not hiding, not offered, just there. "You know knots?" I asked. "I know enough." Her voice had grit to it like coffee boiled too long but still worth drinking. "Show you one saves leather." I looped the first tie, snugged it. Square knot, right over left, left over right. Doesn't slip under pull, doesn't stick when you ask it to come loose. She watched my hands, then took the rawhide and finished the run herself. Fingers sure, even with the road's shake still living in them. She pulled, tested. The saddle took the strain and held its tongue. "I don't beg," she said, eyes on the leather. "I ain't asking you to." I wiped the blade on my pant leg and slid it home. "Just hate to see good horse flesh carry a bad fix." That got the edge of a breath out of her, almost a smile. If the country weren't so mean with them. She tipped the canteen without asking. I didn't stop her. "A sip, too." She handed it back like a coin you settle square. "You headed anywhere in particular?" I asked. "Anywhere that ain't behind me," she said, and that was all the map she needed to share. My place sat a mile off, where the windmill throws its shadow long across the tank, and the cottonwoods buzz with cicadas, mean as saws. I jerked my chin that way. "There's water. Trough's clean. Shade if you trust trees." She glanced toward the horizon she'd been hauling, and then toward mine. A wind flicked her collar, lifted the old rawhide at her throat. Whatever conversation ran between her and that strip ended quick. She nodded once. We came in slow. The mill was talking. Every good windmill has its language. Metal on metal with a little complaint and a lot of purpose. I liked hearing it more than I liked hearing men. I pulled the brake and let the wheel ease to a stop. Water whispered into the tank from the wet pipe like it was glad for company. She led the roan to drink. The horse put his lips in and blew, then went at it steady. The brand-caught sun went pale, then dark again. I looked away and checked the pump head, pretended to find a reason for my hands to stay busy. There's comfort in bolts you can tighten. She set a small canvas shelter just outside my fence, where the ground is tamped by hooves and boots both. Not on my land, not in town, exactly in between, like a coin balanced on edge. She did it neat, no waste motion, stakes straight, guy lines snug. When she finished, she sat on her heels, a spell, palms on her knees, breathing like things hurt that she hadn't named. I fetched coffee grounds from the house and a tin cup with most of the blue speckles burned off. I boiled the water on a little brush fire and poured. She wrapped both hands around the heat and didn't drink right away. The wind ran its fingers through the mill veins and found they were at rest, so it moved on to the cottonwoods and tuned them instead. "Name's Jake Hollis," I said, not holding it out like a handshake, so much as laying it on the step between us. "I fix wind and wire when wind and wire act up." She looked at me over steam. "Etta," she said, "no last name, just that." It fit the way her coat fit, useful, no extra. We let the quiet do the heavy lifting. A meadowlark tried a note and thought better of it. Somewhere down toward the river, a calf cried for a minute and then remembered how to chew. When she finally sipped the coffee, her shoulders came down a notch. Not safe, just less braced. As the sun slid off the roof tin and the tank turned a dull coin color, I showed her where the spare bucket hung and where the old rope gets mean and brittle. I told her about the nights the wind screams through the cottonwoods like they're full of wolves, and how the squeak in the mill is worse in that weather, not because anything's failing, but because the sound has work to do. She listened with her eyes and with the calloused pads of her fingers, feeling the lip of the cup. She didn't thank me. I didn't require it. Gratitude's a funny currency out here. It spends fast and buys less than you think. We traded something better, competence, passed back and forth quiet as a knife. When the light thinned to the size of a coin you could lose in your pocket, she set the cup down, stood, and checked the roan's cinch. She touched that frayed strip of rawhide at her throat a second, like a man touches a scar before weather. Then she let her hand fall. "Wind's kinder out here," she said. "Some nights," I answered. Some nights it remembers." She gave the shortest nod you can give and still have it be a nod. Then she turned and disappeared into the little canvas lean-to, leaving the brand to catch one last lick of lantern glow from my porch. That night, with the mill at rest and the tank full, I sat in my doorway holding a cup that had gone cold. I listened to the slow tick-drip of the packing, to a horse's wet sigh, to the endless, patient breath of country that doesn't care who quits and who keeps on. I told myself I'd done nothing at all, just a stitch, a knot, a cup. But somewhere in the sound of, that steady water I heard, something I hadn't heard in years. It wasn't mercy, it was company. Bad news came in on the smell of green water. The tank wore a faint skin of algae that morning, the kind you skim with a tin plate and flick to the grass. Wind had settled into a lazy push from the south, warm as a dog's breath. I rode into Dry Willow for washers and cartridges, and the sort of talk a man pretends not to hear. Widow May Archer's store keeps its own weather. Coffee steam, flour dust, harness oil, and a little sugar to sweeten the lies folks tell themselves. May writes what matters in a ledger and keeps the rest in her face. When the bell over the door gave its tired jingle, she looked up from counting nails. Her eyes did a Quick pass over my arm, my jaw, my general supply of quit. You're short on .56 to .56 again, she said, which was her way of asking whether I planned to let the wind handle trouble if trouble came. Spencer likes to eat, I said. Trouble likes to feed it. She slid a box across the counter. Colt Mercer's been sniffing around the San Miguel end of things. Says some folks don't deserve more water than they can swallow. I felt a tightness where the ribs remember getting kicked. He say it to you? He said it to the air, May answered. Air told me just fine. The San Miguel doesn't look like much most years. More memory than river. But down under my place, the earth keeps a hoard. You drive steel and patience deep enough, and it lifts to the light, cool as a Sunday shade. I'd set that windmill years back with old Thomas Yazzie standing by, feeling the ground with the side of his boot, listening to dirt the way a midwife listens to a belly. He wants the aquifer, I said, not meaning to say it out loud. Wants the cut behind you, too, May added, voice flat. Dry willow cut's a sweet little shoot. Slide a string of horses or a crate of long guns through after moonrise, no one the wiser. She dusted her hands. Unless someone's cowbells start telling tales. I smelled the hot iron and mesquite smoke where there wasn't any, like a memory sneaking under a door. Rusk hear him talking fancy like that? I asked. Deputy Rusk hears what pays him to hear. May's mouth went thin. He's been skimming tolls off the freight road and calling it upkeep. If the red sash offers more, his badge'll weigh less by sundown. The bell jingled again, and Rusk himself shouldered in, star crooked on his vest. He's the sort of man a hat wears out of shame. Mornin', he said, which sounded like he was trying the word for the first time. His eyes hit my cartridges, slid to May, then to the pickle barrel like he'd come to town just to discuss cucumbers. Deputy, May said, no warmth on it. You intending to keep the road quiet? Rusk picked at a hangnail that needed picking about as much as the county needed him. Road's fine, he said. Heard coyotes. Might set traps. His gaze never found mine straight on. Ain't no gangs, just men. Riding. Folks talk air talks, May said sweetly. You should listen. He bought a plug of tobacco on the store's credit and carried it out like law. The door shut on his shadow, and the room felt cleaner. Old Tomas Yazzie leaned in from the bolt cloth, his braids tied in rawhide, weather settled deep in his cheeks. He had the habit of appearing like a shadow you'd grown used to. Wind will turn tonight, he said, not wasting hello. From west, hard. Fire likes wind like that. Smoke likes men who can't see. You smell it, I asked. He nodded toward the north window. Dust tells it. Dust knows before bones do. I bought what I came for, and an extra length of lamp wick besides. On my way out, May caught my sleeve, 2 fingers only. Colt Mercer's got a scar runs clear from ear to jaw, she said. Old knife. Folks stare at the cut and miss his eyes. Don't miss his eyes. Noted, I said. Outside, the street was full of sunshine and talk that pretended to be about weather. Brenny Cole lounged by the hitch rail like a man who'd never been corrected by life. He saw me and smirked as if the day required it. Here you got company out at the windmill, he said. Girl with a neck problem. Not a problem, I said. A brand. He flinched and hid it under a laugh. Well now, guess some folks like jewelry. I stepped off the boardwalk and let my spur sing one note on the edge of the plank. Brenny, I said, you ever notice how a calf learns manners? First it finds a fence. He didn't have a good answer, which was the only kind of answer I wanted from him. I left him studying the geometry of his boots. On the ride home, the sky looked honest, but the light felt wrong, like a smile that doesn't reach the eyes. Cottonwoods clattered. The windmill on the horizon flashed a blade and went back to work. At the tank, algae smell rode the surface till I skimmed it clean. Etta had her lean-to squared tight against the dirt. Bedroll rolled, shotgun leaned where a hand finds it in the dark. When I told her what May told me, she didn't swear or spit or pace. Her jaw set once and stayed. She touched the frayed strip of rawhide at her throat, thumb rubbing a place worn smooth by the same thumb 100 times. "They want the water," she said. "They want the cut." "Cut," I said. "Injai and anything standing between the two. Then they'll come." She stood, testing her shoulder like it belonged to a stranger she had to work with. "Wind turning?" "Old Tomas says west by night." "Good," she said. "West wind keeps a shotgun's smoke off your eyes." I felt that tightness again, and behind it something I hadn't carried in quiet years. A thin, hard wire of resolve, humming. The brand near her collarbone caught a scrap of sun, went bright and then calm. Out past the fence, a hawk wrote its crooked signature on the sky and headed toward Sageback Ridge where the land lifts and the shadows get teeth. I checked the mill's brake. I oiled the gearhead until it whispered easy. I cleaned the cowbells and made each tongue slick. The country pretended to nap. Etta set her coat, her canteen, and that keepsake rawhide where she could reach them without looking. We didn't speak plans like oaths, we set them like tools. By sundown the wind had the edge old Tomas promised. It slid under the porch boards and tasted the house. Lantern light met it at the door and flickered once in greeting. Somewhere out beyond the cottonwoods 3 crows lifted off the fence all at once and left the wires shivering. The air had a feeling to it, the feeling the land gets when men start wanting more than their thirsts. 3 riders laid their shadows over the dust like a coffin lid. I heard them before I saw them, spur talk and saddle leather and the slow grin of hooves coming down a hard pack. The windmill was ticking under a shy breeze, blades giving the kind of lazy nod a man gives to trouble he recognizes from a ways off. They pulled up at the gate where the wire meets the cottonwood post. I set the first spring I owned this land. The lead man sat big easy in the saddle, a blue neckerchief under his chin, hat brim pulled to shade a face cut by an old knife that had done its work and moved on. Scar ran ear to jaw. His eyes didn't. They stayed. Left and right rode small meanness. One with teeth the color of creek mud. Lyle. One with coal-chip eyes sunk too far back. Pike. The third had a seam puckered down his cheek like a piece of jerky dried wrong. Ob. Red cloth showed at a hip, at a wrist, at a pocket. Nothing a magistrate could swear on. Everything the wind could. "Afternoon," Scarface said, voice dry as a fence post. "You, Hollis?" "Been known to answer to it," I said. He looked past me at the mill, at the tank, at the track of wagon wheels where folks come for water in August. His mouth liked what his eyes were measuring. "This spread sits wrong," he said, "for us. You got a cut behind you wants clearing. You got wind and wet that don't belong to one man's shadow." He let his reins droop. "We aim to correct the map." I felt the wire hum under my hand without touching it. Etta stepped out from the lean-to's shade like a cloud turning to rock. She'd left her coat unbuttoned, though the wind had a tooth to it. Shoulder easy, shotgun at rest against a post, eyes level, because eyes know their own weight. The brand showed where the collar didn't. Lyle's grin hiccuped and then pretended it hadn't. "You got no papers says any of this is yours," Pike said, and tried to make the word papers sound like law. "Trail needs to be safe. Commerce needs a path. That cuts a choke point. Men of sense will agree." "What you mean is you need a dark slot to slide your theft through," I said. My tongue tasted iron. I hadn't bitten. "There's roads enough for honest feet." Scarface's smile went small. "Honest men make poor route scouts," he said. "Look here, old-timer. We ain't petitioning. We're notifying. The wind's due west tonight. West wind carries fire like a hired man carries pay. You hand the ground over quiet. We leave your house square. Maybe your wind, if it minds its manners. I felt my shoulders stiffen of its own mind. A part of me, old and tired and talented at survival, began its whispering work. Don't dig in. Give 'em the strip by the cut. Let them pass like storm water. Nail your windows. Keep your blood inside you. I'd listened to that part before and lived to ride fence another day. Living can be a sorry excuse for living. I said nothing because the word wanted in my mouth had two sides, and either would cut. Etta took one step, just one, but the step pushed the air aside for a long way. Her voice carried like a bell that never rusts. You tried to break me, she said. I'm still here. Scarface's eyes found the mark like a crow finds a bright thing. He measured it as property first, then as mistake. We do good work, he said, lazy. Stays on a person. It stays, Etta said. Nothing else you did. Lyle made a sound like he'd found a joke under a rock and wished to share. Pike's fingers ghosted the butt of his pistol, not drawing it, just letting it know it might be time. Hobbs' horse stamped and blew and wanted a different job. I kept my hands where everyone could inventory them. No call to crowd, I said. You say you're notifying. Notification received. Now you can ride on Scarface, took in the mill again. Blade, tail vane, the brake lever. He saw the trough brimmed and the soft ring of wet iron cooling from the sun. He smelled the promise of a night wind and what a line of torches can do with it. He smelled fear the way dogs do, and he looked for the leash on mine. I kept it short. You fix wind, he said. I like a man with a trade. Gives him something to do while he thinks I've thought, I said. And I'll be here, I said, same as the wind. He watched my face a second longer, then looked back at Etta. The scar on his jaw tugged when he smiled. You bring a pretty kind of trouble, he said to her. Makes a man want to collect brogues. She didn't blink. You don't collect me. Scarface let the smile slip. We come back at dark, he said to the air, using the wind for ink. When the mill sings and the grass listens, if the gate's open, we'll honor your wisdom. If it ain't, we'll teach it. He gathered his reins with a flick, and the three of them turned like a hinge, dust lifting wrong-colored under their horses. They rode off along the fence until the wire drew them thin and the cottonwoods took them away. I heard their spurs a long time after I couldn't see them, the sound a fly makes in a closed room. I stood there with the taste of my own quiet in my mouth. Etta leaned the shotgun back to the post and let her palm rest on the frayed rawhide at her throat. She wasn't shaking. I realized my hands were. You don't owe me a fight, she said, not looking at me. I owe myself one, I said, the truth surprising me by how ready it was. She nodded once. The wind spun the mill a quarter turn without asking, then stopped to think about it. I walked the fence line, felt the staples, tugged the wire, checked the old cowbell that hangs where a boot toe can find it in fog. Its tongue stuttered and I didn't like the sound. Bell's gummy, I said. I'll boil it clean, she answered. Grease it light. We set to small work that makes big nights possible. I oiled the Spencer on the porch steps and felt the familiar persuasion of its action. She filled buckets and set them where a hen doesn't have to go hunting. She rolled the extra coil of rawhide and tucked it near the door. Old Tomas would come by at dusk. He always did when the wind leaned west. May would feel the change in town and stack bandage rolls by her lamp without knowing whose blood they'd be for. The country itself seemed to square its shoulders. When the sun tilted and threw the mill's shadow long enough to cross the road, I felt the day choose sides. In the last light, Etta's brand caught fire and then cooled, same as a forge does when the smith steps away. Somewhere out past Sageback Ridge, a hawk folded up and went to ground. The 3 riders had promised a return. Men like that keep promises better than they keep books. I lifted the cowbell and shook it once. It answered clear. We both listened to the sound fade. Then we waited for dark. All afternoon the wind leaned its shoulder into us from the far mesas, steady as a mule that knows the trail. You could smell dust miles off, taste alkali on the tongue. I set the brake on the mill till the wheel quit clacking and laid out the kind of chores a man does when he means to stay upright through a hard night. First came sand. I cut trenches with a mattock along the porch line and out from the tank, thin crescent scars of bare earth where fire would find nothing to eat. The shovel's bite rang in my hands. Grit climbed my boots and stayed there. Etta hauled from the tank, filled buckets, set them 2 by 2 like paired shoes every 6 steps around the house. She didn't waste her shoulder on pride. The bandage she'd tied for herself rode clean and tight, no weeping through. Short pulls, I said. Steady pulls, she answered, not slowing. Old Thomas Yazzie came walking in the wind like he'd been sent by it. He took one look at the yard and nodded. "West'll shove smoke to your door," he said. "Make your eyes cry quick. Hang light where horses look." "Horse eye height," I said. He grunted yes. We rigged lanterns along the rail and down the yard, each one tied off with fresh lacing, each wick cut sharp, every chimney rubbed clean. Old Tomas produced 2 wire cages from his pack, hacked together from old chicken fence, the sort of ugly that proves its worth when the dark shows up. We mounted them on the outer posts with little pans of lamp oil slow dripping to keep the flame mean but alive. When the wind got teeth, the cages would make the lights stutter and jump, throwing mill blades shadows across the yard like a hawk's wing. Depth goes funny when a light flutters right. "Men ride into their own guesses," he said. "Make the guesses bad." We greased every cowbell tongue by hand till they rang sweet and died sweeter. One of them had begun to catch on the cup. Old solder, bad winters. I boiled it clean on a small fire, and it sounded better, not perfect. Bells ain't prayers, they don't save you. They just say what's coming. I laid the Spencer open on a flour sack and ran an oily cloth through its throat till it shone like a snake's insides. Cartridges sat in a row along the porch rail, brass gone dull from years in a storeroom that favored nails over men. I weighed each one, rolled it under my thumb, listened to the powder shift like dry corn. Stale, some of them. A man can do everything right and still have a primer lie to his face. "Pick your true ones," Etta said, watching me count without counting. "I always do," I said, and set aside a pair that felt wrong. I slipped a length of rawhide through the Spencer's rear swivel and cinched it, so if I dropped the rifle in a mad moment, it'd still have to follow me home. Kid Jesse showed up with a stack of split cedar higher than his hat. He set it down and tried to keep his chest from bursting with usefulness. Dirt had drawn maps across his cheeks, where he'd wiped sweat and painted himself by accident. "Miss May sent cloth and spirits," he said, "and bread she told me not to eat." He swallowed. "Mostly not to eat." Etta's mouth twitched. "You done good." Jesse looked at the lanterns with the seriousness of a man stepping into a church for the first time. "You want 'em even?" "Even enough to be odd," I said. "Make a horse wonder what it's seeing." We ran wire double-twisted, so nothing would clap loose when the gusts came mean. Etta fixed a pair of old-looking glasses to the corner posts, with nails and a prayer, so each lantern would throw 2 lights at once, one true and one lying. She tucked the frayed strip of rawhide from her throat into her pocket like a letter, then cinched her shotgun sling shorter so it wouldn't bang her shoulder wrong. Every motion sure, No talk wasted on things that don't wake when you call them. May herself came as the sun fell away, apron on, hair tucked, jaw set. She put the bundle on my porch, bandage rolls, a jar of carbolic, 2 neat loaves. Law's busy polishing itself, she said, meaning Rusk. Town's sitting on its hands like their eggs might hatch into courage. She lifted her chin toward Etta. You need another set of hands that can tie a knot? I'll do, Etta said, but thank you. May's eyes went to the mill, to the tank, to the cut beyond the cottonwoods where the land pinches down and the road turns to a whisper at night. She understood the shape of the want that would come and the shape of our refusal, and she didn't try to put lace on either. I'll keep a lamp in the window, she said to me. If you see it blink twice, it's me telling you I still know your name. Reckon I'll need reminding, I said, and she left, her back straight as a pick handle. Dusk arrived on the ground before it arrived in the sky. Coyotes tuned themselves in the draws. Wind ran a file across the mill's tail vane and found it brake tight. I set the brake harder anyway. We walked the trench lines with our heads down the way men look for lost rings in dry grass, making sure every shovel bite laid where it ought. Anything else? Etta asked. 2 things. I held up the Gummy Bells clapper. This might stick when it ought to sing. And some of those cartridges got old while I wasn't looking. She absorbed that without flinch, like weather. We'll count on what rings true, she said, and fix what doesn't with our hands. I tasted coffee that wasn't brewed yet and smoke that hadn't come. The porch boards carried the day's heat like a memory it couldn't let go. I set the Spencer within reach of the door and the shotgun where her hand could find it by habit. I put a hammer and a fence staple on the rail because a man never knows whether war is going to ask him to shoot or to mend. Dark works quick past the cottonwoods. 1 minute you can see the world's bones. Next you're feeling for them. Lanterns took the light the sky wouldn't give and made a little town of it. Shadows began their lies, mill blade, fence wire, the slouch of a post turned taller than reason. Somewhere far off a single horse blew, then another answered, and the sound came on, a breath like a promise wrote itself in dust. Etta stood with her palm on the porch rail, fingers apart, reading the tremble that lives there when riders are still a ways out. Old Tomas drifted toward the yard's edge and let the wind move through him, as if he were a gate. Jesse breathed careful so his chest wouldn't squeak. You ready? I said, but it wasn't a question. Been ready since, Etta said, and didn't finish the sentence because some words don't need company. I checked the bell one last time and shook it. It rang true, then caught for a heartbeat before letting go, a hitch you could ignore in daylight. In the dark, you call it by its name, a risk you accept because the night won't take your vote. We took our places then, the way tools go back to their hooks when a job's about to start. The wind pressed steady. The lanterns breathed. The mill waited like a big animal holding its strength, and the country drew a long, slow breath around us, as if it meant to keep the smoke inside till it had news worth sharing. The first sound was a far-off rattle like beans in a tin, the kind of noise hooves make when men ride loose and sure of welcome. Then the wind shoved the cottonwoods and laid the leaves flat, and the lantern cages threw their jumpy light across the yard. The mill braked hard, ticked once as if to say, now. They came in from 2 angles, dark against the low sky, torches lifting, flames slanting west. Red rags at wrist and throat caught the lantern dance and winked mean. I saw Colt Mercer easy enough, knife scar pulling his smile awry, eyes steady as a surveyor's. He raised his torch like a preacher with a book. Land or life, he called, voice carrying clean on the wind. Choose fast. West wind, don't wait. Doors shut, I said. Then so's your luck. The flanking pair pushed for the rear fence where the bell hangs. I lifted the Spencer, shouldered, and let the front sight eat one man's chest. The rifle bucked true. He folded sideways and didn't argue. I swung on the second, worked the lever, squeezed, and the Spencer said, click. No bang, no kick. The bolt half bit, stubborn as an old mule. Jam, I said, flat. I felt shame try to rise and set my boot heel on it. Etta didn't look my way. She pumped the shotgun, stepped into the strobing light, and let both barrels talk. A rider pitched back off his saddle like he'd decided to see the stars up close. She broke the gun, smoked shells out, fed 2 more by feel. The lantern cages made the yard jump nearer and farther in wild inches. Horses threw their heads, eyes taking lies for truth. At the back corner the cowbell should have told us who was coming. It rang once, clear as a church. Then the clapper stuck dead against the cup. A shadow slipped past it like a thief stepping around a dog that won't bark. I heard fence wire sing, then a boot land where it had no right to. Back corner, I said, hauling at the Spencer's lever. Nothing. The old grease in its throat had picked this second to remember its age. Wind changed its mind all at once and slapped sideways. Torches bent like snakes finding meat. Flame licked the eaves and found dry splinters. Fire moves faster than thought when wood has been thirsty a long time. Heat smacked my cheek. Smoke took my eyes and asked hard questions. Buckets, Etta called, already moving. Jesse, brave on skinny legs, kicked a pail loose from its pair and sent it skidding toward her with the toe of his boot. She caught the bale, ran through light and shadow both, and through the water at the roofline where orange crawled to become red. Steam leapt, screamed, died, came back. A shot cracked from the dark. She flinched, staggered, and kept her feet. "You hit?" I said. "Grazed," she said, voice steady enough to count on. Her sleeve went dark along the outer bicep. She clamped elbow to rib to keep the arm honest and racked the shotgun one-handed against her hip, the rawhide sling tight as a tourniquet. I slammed the Spencer's stock to the porch post once, twice, then racked the lever hard as pride. Something mean and sticky gave way. The bolt shut like a decision. A rider burst into the mill shadow, Chimins aiming for the back step and the door beyond it. I put a shot where his thought lived. The horse lunged, riderless, and veered away from the torch he'd meant to plant. At the rear, the silent bell pair came on. Old Tomas had drifted that way the moment the bell failed. He swung the wire cage torch he'd set on a post, lifted it by its bail, and threw that stuttering blaze into their eyes. They saw 3 fences and chose the middle one that wasn't there. Both men went down in the same bad second, one cussing in a language a mother wouldn't claim. Colt kept to the fore, calm in the mess. He slid along the outside of the light, torch held low now, gun high. "We marked you once," he called, hunting Etta through the jump of shadow. "Your cattle." The insult found its mark, but didn't do the work he wanted. Etta stepped up onto the porch rail, higher than sense, shotgun held flat and ghosting in the lantern strobe. The wind stood her coat out. Blood had glued the sleeve to her arm. She looked like a person who'd made a pact with pain and then outlived it. She reached to her throat, yanked free the frayed strip of rawhide she kept there, and wound it tight around the shotgun's grip. "It's not a scar," she said into the noise. "It's a brand of survival." The words cut through gunfire, the way a bell cuts weather. Men hesitated. I watched Colt's eyes notch, not fear yet, but the flinch that comes before it. Wind shouldered hard again. Flames reached for the porch where the first had died. Jesse was already moving, a small body in a big night, dragging a brimming bucket, 2 hands and half a heart. "Here!" he yelped, the shout high but true. Etta dropped from the rail, took the bale, and flung the water up in an arc that caught fire square. Steam lifted like ghosts. She hissed, when the hot found her wound and set her jaw against making it anybody's business. "Left!" old Tomas barked. I swung that way and saw a shape where a man shouldn't be. Inside the yard, crouched, trying to light a twist of grease rag under the porch. The Spencer bucked, the rag went dark, and his hand went useless. He crabbed backward into the mill's shadow and met the business end of my boot. He folded around it and thought new thoughts. Etta kicked a dropped pistol off the step. It clattered into the trenches we'd cut and lay there without loyalty. She lifted the shotgun again, sighted along the barrel like the world was quiet, and blew the lead torch clean off its stick. The head of fire went spinning into a patch of raked dirt and died with a cheap sound. Colt understood then that something had tipped. You can't tip back with powder. His men were shooting too fast and too short, horses blowing hard and blind from grit, whipped up by a mill they couldn't get to. The jumping light made the house seem twice as far, and the yard half as wide. He marked the odds with those surveyor eyes and chose his math. "Back to the cut," he snapped. Heel to flank. He'd meant to leave brag, not blood. They tried to peel away in good order and made poor work of it. Two men tangled stirrups and swore themselves apart. One torch toppled and went dark in a puddle. Another skittered into a sand trench and ate nothing. The cowbell finally shook free and gave a long, late warning no one needed. The sound rolled across the yard and left a hush even the wind respected. I drew breath and tasted roof smoke and penny metal and the salt of my own mouth. On the porch beside me, Etta breathed in time with the wind, slow and mean and alive. Blood soaked the seam of her sleeve and ran warm to her wrist. She didn't give it her eyes. She watched Colt's back with a look I had seen on old sergeants when a line holds. "Right," she said softly. But it wasn't to him. It was to the night, to the moment, to whatever old, tired part of me had kept its head down for too long. The rawhide at her throat had scorched at the edge, where the torch breath touched it, but her eyes stayed cold and bright. "It's a brand of survival," she'd said, and the night changed shape around the words, like canvas pulled tight over a new frame. Colt's men tried to answer with powder and noise. They threw lead at the sound of her voice, at the jump of her coat, at the lies our lantern cages were telling. The mill's blades were still braked hard, but the wind worried. At them enough to cast a strobed wing across the yard, light, dark, light, depth-breaking and reforming in mean inches. A rider leaned forward, thinking he'd clear the trough in one easy bound. The shadow shortened on him as he kicked. He misjudged. His gelding took the iron rim with both knees, pitched, and the man learned about gravel up close. I tracked another shape through the flicker, felt the Spencer settle into my shoulder, like it remembered what it was for. The cartridge burned clean this time. A hat flew where a head had meant to be. I cycled the lever and felt the old rifle smooth up, proud of itself, like a mule that's decided today it will work for the man who feeds it. Etta moved as if she had nothing left to bargain with except accuracy. She kept to the porch line where our sand scars held the ground honest. Smoke reached for her and slid off. When the wind blew her sleeve up, the grays showed, a raw line along the meat of her arm, already stiffening. She cinched the shotgun sling tighter with her teeth and one good hand, and I realized the frayed strip of rawhide she'd wrapped around the grip wasn't just ritual. It gave the wood purchase against blood and sweat. It made a handle out of a history. "What is it?" I heard myself ask, not sure if I meant the leather or the night. "Remnant," she said. Her eyes stayed on the yard, from the rope they held me with. I kept a piece. I looked at that rawhide, dark with years, edges chewed by memory, and felt something cut loose inside me. In the war I'd seen men carry tokens, a bullet flattened in a pocket, A coin a mother kissed, a ribbon that used to be blue. They were small, private treaties with terror. Etta had made hers into a grip you could fight with. The difference mattered. Colt slid deeper along the edge of our light, hunting a clean line, mind working like a surveyor's transit. "You don't get to decide what it means," he called, angling toward the back corner where the bell had stuttered. "We do. We always do." "No," Etta said. She didn't shout. It wasn't a word made for wind. It was a word made for stone. Old Tomas ghosted past the cottonwood and tipped one of the caged lanterns, so its shadow threw long across the gate. The posts seemed 10 paces closer than they were. 2 riders checked too late and tangled stirrups. One went left, one went down. Both cussed the ground like it had broken a promise. Jesse, white-eyed but steady, slid a fresh bucket to the smoking eave with his heel, then hugged the porch post until the shaking in his legs forgot its job. "Back to the cut," Colt barked again, but he hadn't convinced himself. His torch hand lifted a hair. The flame showed his doubt like a preacher shows text. He fired quick at the brightness of a lantern globe, trying to snuff the lies. Glass went, light jumped sideways, and the world doubled for him in all the worst ways. I caught him with the front bead, a neat nickel. Circle on a bad idea. The trigger started home, then something older than orders pulled my finger off. It wasn't mercy, it was understanding, cold as well water, that this wasn't my shot to take. Etta stepped down off the rail like a dancer avoiding a loose board. She moved into the open where the lantern strobe made her look like 3 of herself. Firelight wrote the brand on her throat again. Not ugly, not fine, just true. She raised the shotgun, breathed once, and cut Colt's torch off at the neck. The head of flame spun away like a thrown star and died hissing in our sand trench. His face took the dark hard. For a second he was only the white seam of his old knife work and 2 coins where his eyes had been. That second traveled through his men like a bad wind. You could hear nerves snap. A rein jerked too tight. A horse's bit clanked. A curse came out with a question mark stuck in its tail. Men who had ridden in to collect a brag found themselves counting costs. With pockets they couldn't turn out fast enough. "Go," Etta told the night again. Same word, deeper now. It landed on me like a hand on a shoulder none of my sergeants ever found. I remembered the first time I'd watched a line hold, not because the captain waved his sword pretty, but because a corporal no one could recall outside payday planted his boots and made that little square of dirt answer to him and him alone. The enemy had run out of appetite and called it strategy. I'd told myself later that it wasn't me who did the holding, so I had a right to live ashamed with my bottle. Watching Etta now, I knew I'd been spending counterfeit. A rider came low along the trough, pistol out, making for the step where Jesse crouched. I swung the Spencer, but Etta was faster. She fired from the hip. The blast lit the rawhide on her grip a brief honey color and printed the mill's silhouette across the dust like a church window. The man folded off his saddle and slid to the place where all men go to consider their math. Colt edged backward, trying to turn a pull-out into a plan. He kept his head up, but his shoulders had gone small. "We'll come again," he said, as if saying it made it a promise the world had to honor. "Wind don't always blow your way." "Don't need it to," I said, surprised to hear my voice so certain. "We got hands." He heard that, and it landed. Hands, not luck, not law that took pay, not kindness from a sky that doesn't know your name. Hands that dig trenches, hang cages, grease bells, pick good cartridges from bad, bind wounds, and hold a shotgun level when pain asks to be consulted. That kind of theology is hard to argue with when your torch is out and your horse wants home. He turned his mount and put heel to it. The rest slopped after him, a spill of dark leaving darker. Hooves drummed the road to the cut. then hollowed into distance. The cowbell, with nothing left to lie about, gave one last, honest ring and went still. Wind pushed cool across my face, tasting of ash and penny and the creek weeds that grow where water forgives a place for a while. Smoke thinned. The mill's big body showed itself again in pieces, tail, vane, ladder, like a friend stepping out from behind a joke. My ears rang with what hadn't killed me. On the porch, Etta lowered the shotgun slow, like a person putting down a weight she means to take up again. She glanced at the blood on her sleeve as if it belonged to somebody who'd borrowed her shirt. Then her gaze found me. Not asking, not warning, weighing. I felt my knees answer a question I hadn't asked yet. The tight wire inside me, strung since the first lantern lit, sang one clean note and snapped. Not in shame, not in fear, in surrender to a fact truer than pride. The fact was this: I had seen a brand turned into a grip, a wound made into a handle a person could use to pull themselves forward. I had seen a woman take the rope meant to hold her and wind it into a promise. I had stood next to that and called myself alive. My hand opened on the Spencer. The rifle hung from the rawhide loop I'd laced through its swivel and touched the porch, wood on wood. I took 2 steps toward her and felt the boards under my boots count them with me. "Jake," old Tomas started, as if men like me needed permission to do what came next. "Let him," Etta said, and her voice was softer than anything else in the yard. I went to my knees then, not because the night demanded it, not because a gun told me so, but because nothing else would fit the shape of what I owed. The dirt was cool through denim. It smelled clean under the smoke, and with the wind tugging at the corner of her coat and the brand on her throat catching the last restless scraps of lantern light, I reached my hand up, not to take, not to claim, only to touch. The dirt met my knees like the cool face of a headstone with my name on it. Smoke thinned and threaded past my ears. I raised my hand slow as sunrise and set my palm to the place where the iron had once sung against her skin. It wasn't heat from fire anymore. It was heat from life. The sort a body keeps even when the night would rather it didn't. Under my hand I felt the small rise and fall of breath, the thrum of a pulse that hadn't learned to hurry. The skin was tough where the brand had healed, tender at the edges where memory lives. I wasn't claiming, I wasn't begging, I was acknowledging a fact. Here was a thing the world tried to make into ownership, and the person wearing it had made it into ownership of herself. The yard changed temperature around us. A hush worked its way out from the porch, rolling the length of the fence, slipping through the cottonwoods and climbing the windmill ladder rung by rung. Gun hands stalled. A horse let out a long, confused breath. You could feel men trying to decide whether mockery would save them. It wouldn't. The mocking part of a man is a thin board. Breaks the first time weight steps on it. Etta didn't move back or forward. She stood like a post you hang wire on, plain, necessary, and not asking to be thanked. Her hand came down to rest on mine for a heartbeat, no longer than it takes a lark to think about a note, and then lifted away so the work ahead could have both our hands if it wanted them. Colt Mercer saw it, all of it, and something in his math went crooked. A minute before he'd been drawing lines and angles, measuring shadow and light, laying torch and powder on a yard he thought was just dirt with a house sitting on it wrong. Now he was staring at ground with a meaning he couldn't ledger. He tried to spit a laugh over it and only got spit. "Sweet ceremony," he said, but his voice missed its chair and fell on the floor. I came up from my knees easy, as if I were finishing a prayer. I meant to keep secret. The Spencer hung against my thigh on the rawhide thong, wood warm from my hand. My hat brim carried a gather of ash that let go in a gray whisper when I straightened. "Colt," I said, no shout. I spoke like men do when they discuss water rights at a courthouse table. "Your torch is out." He looked like he meant to argue the point. Then he glanced at the stick in his fist and found a black end that wouldn't play along. The nearest lantern cage stuttered, threw the mill's shadow across him like a church window, and made a lyre of depth one more time. His horse rocked under that lie and came back to straight because it was the smarter soul of the pair. Etta stepped to the porch edge again, shotgun down along her thigh now, muzzle low and safe, the rawhide wrap dark against her blood-slick palm. "You can go," she said, and there wasn't a hair of victory in it, only dismissal. "You don't own anything here." He puffed his cheeks the way boys do when they forget which man they're pretending to be. "We'll come again," he said, finding the line that had comforted him once already. "Wind won't always sing your tune." "The wind doesn't sing," old Tomas answered from the yard's shadow. "It listens." The caged lantern beside him shimmed, its flame leaning, then righting with a patience that made men conscious of their fidgeting. A rider near the trough tried to grow a spine with volume. "Put 'em down, boss." "Take the tank." He spurred into the fluttering light, aiming for the shine of water like a thirsty fool. The mill's wing crossed him, light, dark, light, and his courage tripped on the change. His pistol barked into empty air. His horse planted hard, slid and went down. The man kicked free and got up with dust where his pride had been. He looked smaller for having borrowed more bravery than he could carry. Jessie, still braced to the porch post, whispered a sound that might have been a prayer or a curse. If it was a prayer, it wasn't for us. It was for the land to remember itself as ours for one more night. "Back to the cut," Colt said again, and this time even he heard the word back. He wheeled his horse. The animal wanted the turning like a door wants the wind. They went, not clean, but away. Hooves found their old habit on the road and beat it into dust. Two torches bumped each other like drunks in a hall and fell guttering into our sand lines, where we'd already decided no fire would eat. A last shot snapped wild, and then felt foolish about it. The cowbell, now free of its hitch, shook out one long note and let the night know it could unclench. I stood there counting things that stayed, the roof with a charred grin along the eave, the porch boards warm underfoot, the tanks full and quiet, the breath inside me choosing to keep going. Etta lowered the shotgun and set the butt to the plank between us. Blood dripped from her sleeve in a patient rhythm and pattered where men put their feet when they go inside for supper. She watched the place the riders had collapsed into the dark. "Sit," I said. "In a spell," she answered, "because sitting is a kind you earn, not a thing you do on command." Old Tomas moved through the yard like smoke reversing course, snuffing a guttering rag with the heel of his hand, righting a lantern, letting a horse loose that had wedged its bridle on a post and was starting to think bad thoughts about men. Kid Jessie sloshed a bucket at the porch edge where embers had argued for extra life, then set the pail down and leaned over it with both hands on both knees, learning the taste of victory's afterbreath. Colt's sound dwindled down the road to Dry Willow Cut until only wind had a voice. The mill stood tall and quiet, brakes on, bearing the night easy like a strong man holds a sleeping child. Above the cottonwoods the sky had gone from bruise to ink. Stars pricked through late to the party, but still making it worth dressing up for. I looked at Etta and found her looking back with that same weighing look as before, as if the scale had gotten honest only lately and she meant to keep it that way. The brand at her throat caught a flirt of lantern light, went bright, went calm. I felt the shape of what had just happened settle into me. Not triumph, not even relief, something smaller and more stubborn, a vow I hadn't said out loud but would now be living around. "You done?" she asked, meaning kneeling and meaning more. "Not hardly," I said, "just started understanding the job." We stood together in the doorway as the night backed away from the boards inch by inch. The house smelled of wet smoke and warm bread, maize loaves cooling like she'd baked them for this exact hour. Behind us, the room was a scatter of cartridge boxes and clean rags, and the kind of quiet you keep so you can hear if fate changes its mind. In front of us, the yard lay raw and worked over, and ours. "Dawn'll show what stayed," old Tomas said, coming up the steps on soft feet. "It will," I said, "and what didn't need to." Etta shifted her weight, favoring the arm that had taken the graze. "We'll bind that," I told her. "We will," she said, and didn't add after or when. Out here, time understands you better if you don't boss it. Somewhere far off, a coyote sang a song that used to scare me when I was new to the country. Tonight, it sounded like a neighbor bragging on a calf. I let the mill have its rest. I let the lanterns burn down to good sense. I let my hand hang open at my side, the memory of heat still living in the palm. I had gone to my knees in dust and found no shame there. Only ground, only breath. Only the knowledge that a mark can be a shackle or a key, and a man can choose which lock to fit it to. Morning wind carried cold ash and wet grass. The smell of after. The east unbuttoned itself slow, letting a pale seam of light in along the mesas, until the whole sky remembered how to breathe. I took the brake off the mill one notch. The wheel turned like an old shoulder finding its range again, and water began to whisper into the trough, steady as a promise kept late. What burned showed easy. The eaves wore a black grin where flame had licked and lost. The sand trenches we'd cut lay scuffed but righteous, their bare bellies full of dead sparks. In the yard, 2 torches sprawled like snakes that had forgotten how to be mean. Beyond the cottonwoods, the road to the cut wore a fresh stripe, hoof scar, boot scrape, blood gone brown, things that left always leave a note. Etta let me steer her to the porch bench with the quiet stubborn of a person who's forgotten how to be tended, then remembered and didn't fight it. I laid the breadboard across her knees for a table, set May's jar of carbolic beside a basin, and cut strips from a flour sack boiled quick in the kettle. When I eased the sleeve back, the grays looked clean, mean, red, honest, powder, tattooed her skin in a little constellation. The flesh had puckered to hold itself together. "This will burn," I said. "So did the night," she answered, and held still. I washed the line till the carbolic told both of us we were alive. The smell bit like a small animal and then behaved. She didn't clench. She breathed where breath was called for and let the rest pass. I tied off the bandage with a square knot because I trust square knots to do the decent thing when nobody's looking. When I palmed the wrap flat, the rawhide on her shotgun grip brushed my wrist. It felt warm, used, willing. "Good work," I said, meaning the wound and the woman, and the hours that delivered us to morning. She tipped her chin toward the yard. "Good work," she said back, and didn't say whose. Wind lifted then, gentle as a mother's hand, and turned a single thing loose from the cottonwood above the gate. An eagle feather, big and brown and white-tipped, spinning on its own math. It drifted down without hurry, touched once on the mill ladder, once on the rail, then came to rest in the dust between our boots. The feather's spine held true. The veins were rough where weather had had its way, but still themselves. Old Thomas reached it first. He pinched the quill between finger and thumb and set the feather on the porch rail, crossing it with care. "Signs come when you don't pay for them," he said. "Best not to brag." "I ain't got the breath," I said. He smiled a piece. "You will." The town found its courage about then, or its curiosity, which amounts to the same thing when daylight's on your side. Widow May came first, apron still on, hair pinned tight. 2 men from her store in tow with a coil of new rope and a face full of intent. Kid Jesse had beat them all by a nose. He'd stayed the night, our porch, in a crouch, and now unfolded himself with the uncreak of a boy who thinks he might be a man. He fetched water without being told and set a cup beside Etta like a deacon sets down a hymn book. "Looks like you'll live," May said, eyes taking inventory, roof, yard, bodies, breath, quicker than her mouth would ever admit. She set a small tin on the bench. "Honey salve." "For later." "Thank you," Etta said, and the words didn't cost her dignity a cent. The men from town looked a touch disappointed. There weren't more bodies to stand around, the way folks do when they miss a parade. They found enough, though, two laid out at the fence where the caged lantern had lied, one near the trough, with his courage still sloshing inside his hat. We covered faces with feed sacks, because the dead deserve not to stare. Deputy Rusk arrived last, which was fitting. He came on stiff-legged with his star sitting wrong, like it had lost weight in the night. He stopped short of the porch. When May turned to meet him in the yard, small as a matchstick, and twice as quick. Her finger went into his chest just once. "You knew," she said, not a question. Rusk's jaw worked around nothing. His eyes hopped off mine, off Etta's bandage, off the feather on the rail, and landed on the black smiles along my eaves. He had the look of a man who'd expected to write a report shone about a fire and found a story about water instead. He reached up, thumbed the badge loose, and held it like a coin even a cheat won't pass. "I been light where I should have been heavy," he said. The words landed wrong in his mouth, but right in the yard. May didn't soften. "You'll make it heavy now. You'll take a dozen good men to the cut, and you'll bring back anything that wears a sash or answers to Colt. You'll do it on foot if you have to, so your horse don't have to carry your shame." Rusk turned to me because a certain kind of man needs a witness when he's choosing to be better. I nodded once. That was all he got and all he needed. He tucked the star into his vest pocket like a debt marker and started naming names. The men he picked stopped being storekeepers and hands and took on the shape of a posse. When they heard their names said right, Jesse started to step forward, but May's hand found his shoulder and kept him small a little longer. "You'll help me clean," she told him, and he took that as a grace. They went quick down the road, weapons honest in their hands. Faces turned toward the notch, where the land pinches and bad ideas hide. Old Tomas drifted with them to the cottonwoods and then peeled away, shaking his head at a certain patch of grass like it had promised too much to too many. Quiet came back in layers. The first layer was the kind that lets you hear your own pulse. The second is the kind that carries bird talk and bucket clink and the huff of a mill sucking work from air. The third, and this one hides if you look straight at it, is the kind that lives inside a person after a thing ends and before anything else begins. I liked that kind. I'd missed it. Etta stood when it came and tested her arm, found its limits, nodded to them, same as you nod to a neighbor you don't plan to borrow from. The brand at her throat picked up the low morning sun and gave it back unashamed, a dull shine like a medal that's done its share of duty on a coat hung by a door. I thought of the men I'd knelt with in dirt 1,000 miles and a dozen years from here, and how not a one of us would have had language for what I felt now. Maybe you don't need language. Maybe you need a porch rail and a feather and the smell of carbolic going to work. We walked the yard once more, collecting the night's story where it had written itself on ground. Boot heel here, brass there, a drop of blood like punctuation beside a fence staple. Etta bent slower than pride would have liked and lifted a spent shell. She turned it in her fingers and pocketed it like a man pockets a coin he means to remember a debt by. "You keeping that for luck?" I asked. "For record," she said, "by the month." Time the sun cleared the cottonwoods proper. The mill's shadow had shortened to something you could step over without ceremony. The house stood. The tank brimmed. The feather didn't move at all. "Law's awake," May said from the doorway, more hopeful than convinced. "It's stretching," I said. "We'll see if it stands." It will, Etta said, and because she'd held through a worse night than this one, I let myself believe her a while. We ate bread without butter, and it tasted better than most feasts I've been invited to, and left early. We drank water that cost us only the price of staying. Little by little, the country put its shirt back on and went to work. And so did we. The day had claims yet to make, but for a spell it let us own what we'd saved. Some marks make a man bow, not from fear, but from thanks. That thought met me at daybreak and walked with me clear through noon. By midday the sky had gone clean and high, the kind of blue that makes a mill look taller than it is. I let the brake off 2 notches and listened to the wheel take hold, a steady whoop whoop that says water's being persuaded up from where God keeps it. The trough brimmed and spilled, and the spill for the grass that had no business being that green in this country. Etta stood with one boot on the rail, bandaged neat, face pale where the night had taken its toll and given something back. Town came again, not for gawking this time, but for doing. Men with pry bars and shovel handles, women with rope and hats stitched tight against their heads. They walked past the porch without taking a pole. We strung line from cottonwood to cottonwood at the mouth of Dry Willow cut and built a fence rock by rock, post by post, a wall that told bad ideas to try the long way around. Old Tomas showed them how to set the cornerstones, so they talked to the ground and not to themselves. Kid Jessie fetched and carried and learned the trade of tired. May Archer brought a ledger, and that look she saves for liars, and we went into my kitchen like it was a courthouse. She set the book down between the coffee rings and laid out papers she'd had tucked away for a day like this. Claims and affidavits, the language of stubborn written in ink. You can fight a man with fire, she said, tapping her claws with one clean finger, and you can fight him with paper. We'll file the water for the town as a public right. Access held by usage, maintained by common work. You'll be named keeper, not owner. Keeper's an old word. It carries better. I put my name where names go, when a man means to be looked for if he fails. May signed witness. Etta watched from the doorway, eyes narrow against the light, mouth soft in a way I hadn't seen yet. Deputy Rusk came back late afternoon with 4 men and 1 promise kept. They were windburnt and dusty, eyes red, the way the desert paints you when you've stared down distance for hours. Colt Mercer wasn't among the living. They led. He wasn't among the dead either. The men they did bring wore rope on their wrists and the gray look of boys who had outspent their luck. Rusk didn't have his badge on his vest. He had it in his fist. He set it on the porch rail beside the eagle feather like a coin put down where hands can see it. Paperwork's filed on the prisoners, he said. I'll ride them to the territorial judge come sunup. May didn't smile. We're Western people. We don't use sugar where salt will do. And you? She asked. Rusk cleared his throat. I ain't the man for that star. I thought I liked it. Turns out I liked what it bought me. He looked past May to me and past me to Etta and past all of us to the mill. Stage company needs a rider on the North Loop. Mean country, long miles, not much pay. His mouth went tight. That'll do me a while. It will if you keep it, I said. He nodded once, a small square thing. Shame makes some men fold. It made him useful. Toward evening we walked the fence at the cut and stapled the last length of wire. The rocks stacked to a man's chest looked like they'd been there forever, which is the best a day's work can hope for. A broken torch head lay in the sand like a rusted flower. Jessie picked it up and set it on the wall, as if to say, we saw you, we're done with you. Back at the house I fried salt pork and skillet bread for whoever showed. The porch filled with the easy talk people keep for after, the way a horse took a jump, the way the wind did or didn't help, where the ground surprised you with stone. Etta ate slow, left nothing, wiped the plate with the last of the bread like a woman who refuses to let good go to waste. whether it's food or breath or a night that tried to make her smaller and failed. When the sun dropped flat, the wind laid down with it. I set the mill brake light and watched the wheel coast to a stop, the tail vanes settling like a big bird deciding it had flown enough for one age. Shadows climbed the yard and quit climbing when they ran out of reasons. Somewhere a whip poor Will tried his name on the dark. "You'll keep the water?" Etta asked. Not a doubt, not a dare. Just checking whether the world we'd spoken into being still matched the one she was standing in. "I'll keep it," I said, "for whoever needs it." I touched the papers May had left under a plate to keep the wind off. "Keeper's an old word. I can carry it." She nodded. It looked like a salute if you knew how to read small signs. "Where will you go?" I asked. I could have not asked. Men lose things by speaking too soon. But the question had been pacing inside me since the first cup of coffee in the Copper Mule. "Forward," she said. The corner of her mouth softened, then steadied. "There's a woman up country near Tres Sables. Looks after girls with no home and boys with more temper than chances. She'll use a pair of hands. Mine still work." She glanced at the rawhide wrap on her shotgun grip. "And I got a thing to show people about what you keep and what you let go." "You could stay," I said, not because I thought she would. Because a decent invitation deserves to be heard once by the right ears. "I did," she said, "long enough to remember that a place ain't the same as a cage." She set her cup down. "Long enough for you to remember a thing, too." I looked out at the tank, at the little runnel of green the spill kept alive. "That a fact?" "It is." She stood, tested her shoulder, found it willing enough for a dawn's worth of saddle. "You'll ride into town tomorrow. File more paper, shake a man's hand who don't deserve it yet, and see if he can live up to it. Then you'll come home and fix what squeaks." "Wind'll always leave me something to fix," I said. "Good," she said. "That way your hands don't forget what they're for." We walked the yard one last time while the light held. Old Tom's drifted off like smoke heading somewhere it belonged. May took her empty tins and the ledger with our names in it and left the feather where it lay, as if a thing that falls between two people shouldn't be moved without permission. Jessie sat on the top step, heels knocking the riser, looking tired in the proud way boys get when they finally sleep because they've earned being awake. At the gate, Etta turned and looked at the porch, at the rail with a badge and a feather sharing the same piece of sun-bleached wood, at the black grin of the eve where Flame had told a story and lost the ending. She touched the frayed strip of rawhide at her throat, then unwound it from habit and tied it once around the fence post, snug and square, right over left, left over right. It sat there plain as a prayer you don't say out loud. "For record," she said. I put my palm to the knot, felt the warmth the day had left in the post. "For record." She swung into the roan's saddle like a woman who's made up her mind a few more times than most. The horse turned toward the north without help. She looked down the line of fence, out past the mill, into a future neither of us had claim on. The brand at her throat caught the last mean light and made something clean out of it. "You ever need water?" I said, "because I'm a man who keeps saying the obvious when it matters." "I know where it lives," she said, and nudged the roan on. She rode through the cottonwoods and let the trees counter with their leaves. The sound thinned. The dust she picked up put itself back down. Night came up on its hind legs and then settled, polite for once. I sat on the porch till the boards cooled. Then I stood and set the brake on the mill and listened to the big body go quiet. In the silence that followed, something uncoiled in my chest and lay down like a dog that's finally learned a house can be trusted. I looked up at the sky, at a field of stars with no fence around it, and I talked to whoever might be listening in a voice that didn't need to be loud to be heard. "A scar ain't always a shackle," I said. "Sometimes it's a brand of freedom." If you've ever met someone whose mark made you bow your head and stand up straighter at the same time, you know what I mean. If you haven't yet, you will. Out here, where wind writes the news and water edits it, we keep the stories that teach our hands what to do. Some nights cut you down to the clean grain. This one did, and what stayed was worth keeping. Wind quiet on the mill, bread warm on the porch, and a brand that quit being a shackle and started telling the truth. If a story like this brushed something loose in you, ride with me. Drop a simple tally. 1 if you've seen a scar turned into a badge. 0 if you're still waiting. Hit subscribe so we can keep passing the tin cup of this Old West tales along the line. See you at the next campfire.